Number 1.
I'm a small female living alone in a large city. Knowing exactly what this could mean for me, I'm pretty wary of my surroundings and the people in it. I recently moved to the back of an apartment complex, to the 3rd floor, which I was very excited about since I hate being on ground level. A few days after moving in, I met my across-the-way neighbor, Steve. Steve was tall and skinny with dark hair and the tryings of a beard. He was nice, polite in our few passings, but we never had more than an exchange of a few hellos until one Saturday night. My friend dropped me off at my place late that night, and I stumbled up the stairs, stupid drunk. I knew I was making a racket because Steve opened his door as I approached mine. I waved at him and smiled as I fumbled for my keys. I was facing my door, trying to remember which key it was, as they all looked the same, and I felt Steve come up behind me. He grabbed my hand with the keys and breathed, "Let me help," and immediately found the correct key and helped me put it into the keyhole. It could have been romantic, looking back, if this guy hadn't proceeded to stick his nose into my hair and take a deep, shaky breath. The red alarms immediately started going off in my head and cut through my drunken stupor. My breath was frozen on my throat, and I realized just how fucked I could possibly be. "Thanks," I mumbled, before slipping through my door and locking it behind me. I stood there for a moment, going, "What the fuck?" when I heard a soft thump on the other side of the door. I slowly turned and looked through the peephole, but I couldn't see anything. Only blackness, which didn't make any sense, because there was light outside which kept the staircase lit. I blinked and stepped back before checking again. This time, I saw Steve backing away from the peephole. My body felt like it was dunked in ice water. Steve went back into his apartment, and I didn't hear anything else that night. For a few weeks after that, I would hear the same soft thump and find Steve trying to peer into my apartment from the peephole. I could hear his heavy breathing. Sometimes he would even paw at the door, but he never came out when I would come home after that first time. I never called the cops. I probably should have, but Steve was my neighbor, and I didn't want to stir up any animosity that I would have to deal with. Steve moved out 2 weeks ago.
Number 2.
I live in Estonia, a country that is not the safest place on Earth, but it's no South Africa. These days the crime rates are falling, but this story takes place in Soviet times. This didn't happen to me, but a family member. I didn't even exist yet. Soviet times are pretty difficult. Huge lines for food, no free speech, poverty. This all generates crime and much more. This happened in northern Estonia, near the capital. You see, this family member was partying in Tallinn and decided to go home. She lived in Gala, a small town near Tallinn. There was a couple of train stops to Gala, but she was tired and fell asleep on the train. She went 2 stops past her stop and woke up. She went out in a stop for another town called Paldiski. You see, in Soviet times, a lot of migrants were forced into Estonia proper to colonize it with Russians, Caucasians, Kazakhs, and all sorts of other nationalities. This made tensions rise. This isn't helped by the fact that, going by Estonian standards, most of the people brought in were pretty uncivilized. Paldiski itself was a military town, and a girl was raped by Soviet soldiers in the same town a few years earlier. She decided to walk along the train tracks home, since waiting for the next train would have taken hours. The train she took was the last train that day. She had walked probably about 750 meters, and was far out on the tracks. Estonia wasn't densely populated, and it did not take a lot to be in the middle of nowhere. She had noticed a scruffy-looking dude just chilling in the woods. This scared her a lot, seeing as there was no reason for him to be there. In hindsight, he probably saw a good-looking 17-year-old girl get out in a stop and walk along the tracks alone, and decided to follow her in the woods. He got out of the woods and started walking behind her on the tracks, and this sounds like a fucking cliche, I know. But this guy started walking faster whenever she changed her own pace, and before you know it, She is running, and he is running after her. Men are almost always faster runners than women, and her get-up wasn't really made for such a situation. So we caught up. A fight ensued. In the process, she shoved her fingers into this guy's eyes. I don't know the details well since she didn't tell me about this story. My mother did. But she was saved by God himself. This is the only explanation. A cargo train had gone past, and she managed to slip to the other side, and these cargo trains are fucking huge. It just gave her enough time to just get the fuck out of there. She got home like 3 hours later, and it was dawn by then. As soon as she got into her town, she started screaming for help, and was hysterical. She was a mess, covered in blood, bruises, and scratches. This story had a happy end, but had that train not been there at the right time, I am certain that this would have been another rape and murder, another body found in the woods, another unsolved crime, and another broken family.
Number 3.
Some backstory. I'm a female in my early 20s, and I moved to Belfast from Sweden a few years ago. The taxi prices here are so much better than the ones where I'm from, and for a good year and a half I relied on taxis getting me pretty much everywhere, including to and from work. I usually tell this story to friends and family as a funny story whenever I have a few drinks in me, or someone brings it up. But to be honest with you, I was completely horrified when it happened. So about a year and a half ago, I was out for drinks with a friend of mine, and her friend that was visiting from abroad and was staying at my house since I had a spare room. For some reason, they went home before me, and I was left by myself at the bar, which, I know, is a really dumb thing to do. After an hour or so, a few drinks, and a failed attempt at picking someone up, I decided it was time to call it a night. I usually book taxis as there are a few handy apps, but with it being a pay weekend there was no way I'd be able to get a car. So I walk outside hoping for the best. The moment I get outside, I'm approached by an older man, white hair, and on the heavier side, asking if I need a taxi, so I cheerfully accept, thanking my lucky stars that I'll be home very soon. The taxi didn't belong to a taxi company, which admittedly is a bit strange, but I've taken those before with friends, without issue. Right off the bat, the driver starts asking the usual questions, like where I'm from, and how long I've been in town, if I'm studying, or if I'm working, what brings me here, and so on. Then he asks if I've ever been on a black taxi tour. These tours are quite famous here, and they're meant to be really good, showing off all the murals in the city and the Peace Wall and such. You also get stories from people that grew up here during the Troubles. I say that no, I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I will definitely get to it, as soon as I can. He then suggests when we get to my house that he'll give me a tour, for free, right now, in the middle of the night. Being the way too nice idiot I am, I hear myself saying, yeah, sure, that would be nice. When what I really meant was, hell nah, dude. So he starts driving out of town, down countryside roads, and not at all in the direction of any murals, and on the other side of town from the Peace Wall. His questions get more personal, asking if I have a boyfriend, and if I have family around, if I live by myself, if I have many friends. He then says, "We can be friends. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" He has this creepy laugh going while repeating the phrase over and over and nudging my side with his arm. He keeps driving in the middle of nowhere, talking about how this footpath was this and that, connecting to other footpaths and so on while dropping the "we can be friends" thing between, still laughing this creepy laugh. At this point, we're about 20 minutes outside of town, and the streetlights stop. It's pitch black out. I'm clutching my phone ready to call the police, and looking at the dashboard GPS to see nearby location names, getting ready to tuck and roll out of the car, completely freaked out by him. I'm finally able to stutter out that I'm getting a bit tired, and it's time for bed. He agrees to take me home and turns around. We pull up outside my house again, and I feel a wave of relief washing over me, like I can finally breathe again. I pay him for the taxi ride, and get ready to get out of the car. He then turns the car off, takes off his seatbelt, and keeps talking, turning slightly so he's kinda half facing me. After a few minutes of talking, him still talking about being friends, I say that I need to use the bathroom, and thank him for the tour. He tells me to hurry back outside so we can continue the conversation. I bolt inside, lock the door, and keep the hall light turned off. I look out through the peephole and can see that he's still sitting there in his car. After about 15 minutes, he finally drives away, and I sort of just collapse on the floor, beating myself up for being so stupid. Needless to say, I've never taken a taxi I haven't booked since.
Number 4.
This story happened on a summer night in Australia, when I was about 15. A quick bit of backstory. A guy I went to high school with was a complete dick to my best friend Jake, and sometimes to me. He was pretty sneaky about it, and never got into trouble, and we could never prove anything. So eventually, we got fed up, and thought of a way to get back at him without getting into trouble. We decided to stockpile as many dead toads as we could find. They are an introduced species here, and a huge pest, in my dad's freezer, and then sneak up to his house and throw them at his house at night. Then in the morning, he's going to wake up with dead rotting toads all over the place. Really stupid and immature, I know. So one night, we finally decide we have enough ammo. We get everything ready right up to his house, which was in a really hilly, annoying part of our suburb, but because of all the hills, it makes for an easy getaway on our bikes, so we persevere. We got to his house around 11:30 p.m., and sneak up and scatter the dead toads all over the place. But right as we are about to leave, Jake decides to throw a frozen toad at the house, and it went straight through a window with a loud smash. We jumped on our bikes and took off absolutely flying down the windy roads in the dark. Eventually, we got to a section of road where we had made a shortcut through some trees and bushes, leading to a bike track where people walk their dogs and ride their bikes. It's about 30 meters of fairly thick bush and trees from the main road, with a 2-lane highway on the other side. It's pretty secluded, so we felt safe. We were sitting there on our bikes on top of a small hill leading down into the highway underpass, chatting and laughing in the dark, feeling pretty happy with ourselves. There were no lights, just the moonlight, and the occasional car headlights on the highway beside us. We started talking about what we should do for the rest of the night, when I could have sworn I heard something moving in the bushes about 10 to 15 meters away. As soon as we stop talking and listen, it stops. So we think nothing of it and keep chatting, but eventually, I hear it again. Jake doesn't believe me and is calling me a pussy and laughing, but I can still hear it, and I'm visibly starting to freak out, which then freaks Jake out. We are sitting there in the dark on our bikes, looking into the darkness, when a fucking huge man just stands up from behind some bushes, wearing nothing but some black tracksuit pants. This guy was huge, had to be around 7 feet, and over 120 kilograms. He had a thick black mustache and long black hair and just started sprinting at us, like nothing I had ever seen in my life. We took off pedaling as fast as we could towards the underpass, and I could hear this guy's footsteps directly behind me. I don't know if it was the fear getting to me and I was just hallucinating or something, but I could have sworn I could feel his hand swiping my back. His footsteps sounded easily close enough for him to grab me, so maybe he did almost get a hold of me. Luckily, my friend and I had been riding BMX for years, because at the bottom of the hill you could either go through some metal barriers to stop motorbikes from riding on the path, and then immediately turn left into the tunnel under the highway, or get through the barriers and go up another hill. This massive human is still right behind me, growling and swearing at me, as we go down this hill with Jake just ahead of me. We get through the metal barriers and he turns left to go under the highway, without saying a word. So I just grit my teeth, go straight and power up the hill as fast as I can. I'm almost in tears, praying to anyone or anything that would listen, when I realize I don't hear him behind me anymore. I look back down the hill, towards the tunnel, and I see him just standing there, staring at me. I will never forget it. We both stared at each other for a few seconds, and all of a sudden, he just sprints off into the tunnel. I was so scared because I had no idea where my friend was, or if this guy had caught him, since this all happened before every person had a mobile phone, and I had no way to contact my friend. I rode as fast as I could to a service station, where I thought he might end up, since the tunnel under the highway kind of leads that way. And sure enough, there he was. We were shaking and freaking out trying to figure out who the fuck that guy was, because we both knew the guy who we were getting revenge on, and what his dad looked like, and it was nothing like that monster of a man who had just chased us in the dark. Still, to this day I have no idea who that dude was, and I've never seen him ever again, but I'm so fucking glad he never caught either of us. I still wonder what would have happened if he had caught us.
Number 5.
I have been working for the same home for the disabled now for the past 6 years. I started working here the week after I graduated college. I majored in social work and knew I wanted to work with the mentally handicapped. My identical twin brother Garrett has Down syndrome. He's my best friend, and I knew I wanted to help folks like him. I will not reveal my exact location for safety and security reasons, but we live in the South. Anyway, on to Jeremy. When I started working here, I was warned by the guy who trained me, Marquise, that Jeremy was trouble. He stated that Jeremy had tackled the previous social worker, a woman. He dry humped her while punching her in the face and spitting on her. She quit on the spot. After that, they decided they would only be hiring male social workers and employees to deal with the male residents. How this home is split up is half of the dorms are males, half are females. All 13 residents, 8 females, 5 males, vary in their diagnoses. They all have varying degrees of mental retardation, and some have physical disabilities as well. Of my 5 guys, Jeremy and Adam were the only 2 physically combative residents. Adam is a low-functioning autistic, but most of his rage was directed towards himself. Jeremy was different. I honestly think he was smarter than most people gave him credit for. That being said, I was always on the top of my game when dealing with him. Or, so I thought. The home is on the grounds of an old farm. There's animals that roam the grounds, some chickens, a few stray cats, and the groundskeeper has a dog. One day the female's head social worker, whose name is Barbara, comes running into my office, her face pale, and tells me to come with her. One of the cats had kittens, and someone, meaning a resident, had strung every kitten there was, 5 of them, from their necks on the clothing line. We knew it was Jeremy. Most of the residents were heartbroken. Even Adam was devastated as he loves the cats. Jeremy, he was sitting on the porch, shit-eating smirk on his face. We tried to get our director to get Jeremy moved to another residential program, but he insisted we monitor our clients better and upped Jeremy's meds. The director is a psychiatrist. The meds seemed to be working. He pretty much walked around in a haze, and we breathed a sigh of relief. Until one day, when the nurse made the mistake of turning her back on Jeremy while she was doing an exam. He bit her shoulder so deeply that she has nerve damage to this day. The director decided after that incident, and the nurse threatening to sue, that Jeremy had to go. He was scheduled to be sent to an institution that could handle him better. All of us were relieved and counted down the days. The night before he was scheduled to leave, though, he went missing. I was paged an hour before lights out, in which we locked him in his room, and was told he was missing. So, we gathered a group of employees and went looking for him. I decided to check out the library, and stupidly went off on my own. I heard noises coming from inside the library, so I radioed the group. I was sure he was in there. They told me to wait, and they were on their way. But I decided what's the worst that could happen. I'm 6'4", 245 pounds. I can take him. I opened the door, and catch Jeremy ripping a book apart. He had already smashed in the computer, and had a pile of books already torn up. He looks up, and I know this is not going to end well. 1 minute I'm standing there, and the next I was slammed into the ground as Jeremy pile drives me. I'm trying to get the upper hand when he puts both hands around my neck and squeezes. It felt like an hour, but fortunately for me, my coworkers rushed into the library and pulled him off of me. Needless to say, he was given a sedative, and locked in his room until the next morning when he was taken away. The last I heard, he attacked a nurse at the facility he's at now. So, Jeremy, let's never, ever meet again. Hollowkeez here. How are you all doing today? So, guess what? It seems I'm going to be interviewed by Margabot sometime next month. If you don't know who she is another uploader who makes her own videos, and has conducted interviews for quite a few other scary narrators, such as Southern Cannibal, and even Unit Number 522. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for it. I'm quite honored, really. So yeah, this is your shoutout, Margabot. If anyone is interested, I'll put a link to her channel in the description. Check out the interviews she's already done. And with that, I bid you adieu. If it's fear you're after, welcome home.